Okay, so my parents learned to be retail merchants. My father learned to candle eggs to make sure there were no incubating chickens in the eggs he was selling, because that would have meant that the eggs were not kosher. I began going to West Philadelphia High School. They put me in a junior class, and I was lucky to be speaking English well enough to manage to get along. For a summer I worked in an ice cream factory, helping myself to a lot of ice cream, and often helped out by my parents' store. Occasionally people came in who needed food but who couldn't pay or couldn't pay all of the cost. And we usually followed a family tradition from my mother's shtetl stories of one of her relatives who had been a merchant, letting the poorer customers decide the amount of their payment. I was lucky to get a full scholarship to go to the University of Pennsylvania, and I had also gotten into Bryn Mawr on a scholarship. But Penn won out as it was close by, and Bryn Mawr was a bit overwhelming for this young refugee. Tuition at Penn at the time was $400, but without the scholarship, I probably wouldn't have been able to go, because at that time $400 was a lot of money for us. The best part of living in West Philadelphia, of course, was the nearby synagogue we were invited to attend, where I met the family of Rabbi C. David Matt. Their daughters Beulah and Zelda became the closest of friends, and we attended Gratz College, a Jewish teachers' college in Philadelphia, together. The Matts had 3 sons, and as in Fiddler on the Roof, I fell in love with one of the sons, the youngest one, Herschel, who luckily also had his eye on me. Years later, our children would tease Herschel because he admitted that during the first high holiday service I attended at his father's shul, he would interrupt his prayers to look for me in the woman's balcony. If you had true kavanah, the children would say, you and Mom might never have gotten married. Herschel's father, C. David Matt, after whom our David is named, was the kindest father-in-law anyone could ask for. Even before Herschel and I had married, and I applied somewhat late for admission and financial aid to college, he insisted on going late at night to the post office by bus, because he had no car, and get my application in on time. There's a family tradition that the Mem Tet in Matt stands for Ma'asim Tovim, good deeds, that this family certainly exemplified, and that I hope is a tradition we carry on. When Johnny went to Israel, he dropped the ayin in the Mem Ayin Tet word that makes up Matt, but he says it still means Ma'asim Tovim even without the ayin. We married in March of 1946 while Herschel was studying at the Jewish Theological Seminary. And our family had a close relationship with Rabbi and Sadie Rose Weilerstein, she the famous children's author of the Ketantan stories. Rabbi C. David would take over Rabbi Weilerstein's pulpit for a month in the summer in Atlantic City so the Weilerstein family could go on vacation. Herschel would enjoy riding his bike on the boardwalk, but he didn't know how to brake to stop, so he drove the whole length of the boardwalk and finally stopped when he got to the end of the boardwalk. I believe he also helped his father those summers by learning to read Torah on Shabbat. We kept up a relationship with Mrs. Weilerstein for many years, visiting her and she visiting us in Metuchen one year for Sukkot. When Debbie was a student at Douglas College, she also invited Mrs. Weilerstein for a weekend at Hillel, talking to students about writing children's books. Speaking of Sukkot, that was the time of year when Herschel became a carpenter, and together with the kids built a beautiful sukkah to which we invited many friends, and where Herschel and the kids would often sleep on Sukkot nights. One year there was a burglar on a Sukkot night on our street who hit just about every house except ours. He might have thought that we had no beds, and therefore were so poor there was no point in burglarizing our house. My fondest dream had been to become a social worker. I wanted to show my gratitude for my and my family's survival by learning to practice what the Rambam taught was the highest degree of tzedakah, to help people in need, to help themselves, to empower them to shape their future. I began graduate school in New York, then transferred to Boston University when we moved to Herschel's first position in Nashua, New Hampshire. Herschel became a much beloved rabbi, but a very restless one, always fearing that he didn't do enough, and that perhaps in the next community more people would become observant and take Judaism more seriously. Services were well attended. He taught many adult education classes, was always active in the general community, Jewish and non-Jewish. And in each position, people begged him to stay. But we moved a few times, from Nashua, New Hampshire to Troy, New York, then to Metuchen, and then to Princeton, New Jersey. He never thought that we moved often, but I did, not being happy to leave friends and familiar surroundings and starting all over again. There was a joke at one of the rabbinical assembly meetings. Someone said, "All the rabbis who are not moving to new congregation this year, please come together for a meeting. It will take place in the phone booth." That was in the days when there were still phone booths. Much to the regret of his Princeton congregation in 1975, Herschel gave up the full-time rabbinate. We moved to Highland Park to an apartment building, and he began to take on teaching positions at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College and a New York seminary, and weekend positions at congregations in Staten Island and later in Mount Holly, New Jersey. Our firstborn Johnny, originally Yonatan, a name he did not like, was 3 months old when I graduated the Boston School of Social Work. Even as a very young child, he didn't like the name, as people mispronounced it, and he preferred being called Johnny. I thought when much later he moved to Israel with his wife and daughter Eliza, he would again be called Yonatan in Hebrew, but instead it became Johnny. My thesis for my master's was written in Manchester, New Hampshire.